and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Our guest today is Stephen Tillett. He is a pastor and he's the author of the book, Stop Falling for the Okie Doke, How the Lie of Race Continues to Undermine Our Country. Welcome back. This is part 2, and we're just talking about what we've been through over the last 10 years and what we're going into with this new decade. I mentioned to you off air that my son, and by the way, kids don't look at media the way we do. We watch MSNBC, CNN, all those other folks, or look at the different newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times. They a lot of times get the most news off of the internet. So the other day we're having a kind of political discussion with my son, and he just blurts out something that I know for a fact is completely wrong. But that's what he heard on the internet. No double checking to see if there's a second source for that. Who wrote that? Where did they get their information? It's like people are just, information is thrown out there like spaghetti, like you're throwing spaghetti against the wall and whatever sticks, sticks.
I was watching, I think it was CNN yesterday. No, it was it was CNN. It was an interview with Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper. And Colbert is talking about how Donald Trump has been able to change the narrative by simply repeating something over and over and over again, even though it is patently false. And then he just kind of Cooper conceded that it gets difficult after a while if you keep saying the same thing, and then we have to keep saying you're lying over and over again, that what you said is untrue. So after a while, it almost makes us look like we're negative people coming after you all the time. But it's like, but if you keep telling the same lie, we have to keep saying that's not true. People have lost, and we talked about that in the first segment, people have lost the understanding of objective truth. Objective truth means that there is a truth, not an opinion, but there's a truth about a particular issue, situation, factor, condition, whatever, and that everything else that you want to say around it is opinion or rumor or conjecture, but there is a truth. And until we get back to that, and so you have the occupant who has gone out of his way to denigrate media. Whenever he talks about newspapers, the failing New York Times, the failing this, the failing that. Number one, of course, their numbers have gone down because less people are subscribing, more reading online, et cetera, but sometimes reading the Times or the Post online. But the other thing is that they have reporters who do investigative reporting based on fact. And so a lot of the things that have come out in the impeachment inquiry were based on reporting that started in some cases from these newspapers. So you want to diminish them so people think, whatever they say is false. I'm just going to believe the dear leader and whatever he puts out on Twitter. And so you have a country that, as President Clinton said, we're living in a fact-free era in America.
But do you find that to be marketing genius? Knowing that if you repeat things over and over and over again, like you said, people are exhausted. People are mentally exhausted by this whole back and forth.
Right. I don't think you will ever hear me use the word genius in the same sentence with Donald Trump, but it does show that he has a skill and an understanding in how to manipulate things to his own advantage, but is to a huge disadvantage for the country. And until, again, we talked about it before, until people are willing to do the work, just to check 3 or 4 sources instead of just one, we will no longer be lazy and we'll do the work to find things out. Until that happens, we'll continue to be in this mess, because you'll have people who will go to one source, hear one voice, and they think that's the truth.
But as we talked earlier, going along with your tribe.
Right.
You whatever your tribe thinks, that's what you're, so you don't even check to see what anybody else is saying. We live in our own little bubbles.
An example comes to mind from the church. So I pastor a congregation, and I have other friends that pastor congregations that are quote unquote family churches, where a fairly large number of the congregation are related to each other. And one of the biggest challenges I found in that situation is that people are often unwilling to challenge their relatives when they know they're wrong. So cousin it, uncle so-and-so, aunt so-and-so, grandma, brother, sister have said something or are advocating a position or taking a stand that is just not true, and you won't challenge them on it because they're in your own tribe. And that leads to it destabilizes congregations, because then there are conflicts taking place as a result of opinions. This is my opinion on the matter. It's me versus you, and it doesn't matter if what I'm standing on is complete nonsense. I'm going to stand on it. That's the same thing that's happening in the country with the tribalism, that there are people that I agree with, so I'm going to stand with them no matter what. That's sort of the disconnect that has happened, that is injuring the evangelical brand. They don't understand that there are people who might want to think that the church has something to offer, and then other people who are certain that it doesn't, and that they will look at evangelicals and say, okay, so you claim that you stand for all these morals and values and principles, but then you support this guy who to date has lied, that we can prove that he's lied over 15,000 times.
15,000 times.
So why should we believe anything you say? But because you're locked into your tribe and your narrow view of what your interests are, instead of what is in the best interest for the greatest number. That's what should be our concern, not what's in my perceived best interest, which often is not even the case there.
Let's talk about the Black church, and do you see the Black church becoming more open to things? We saw in this last decade gay marriage being approved. One of the candidates who's running for president is a gay male. And we've seen in the past how Black churches have rejected the homosexual community. Do you see in the coming months or the coming years that changing, where there'll be a place for everyone, whether you're gay, straight, bisexual, queer, lesbian,
etc.? A lot of times that does not really change until it affects you personally. One of the most conservative politicians in the country has nothing to say about LGBTQ issues in a negative way. Why? Because Dick Cheney's oldest daughter is a lesbian with, I don't know if she's her partner or her wife, that she's married to. So that's nothing he can speak to. Now, if his daughter weren't gay, he'd probably be, foaming at the mouth about it like a lot of other conservatives are. But when it comes to your own doorstep, it's your son, your daughter, your grandchild, it makes a difference. We're actually kind of going through that right now in the United Methodist Church. There's going to probably be a schism that takes place at our general conference next May as a result of the human sexuality issue. You have the traditionalists who say, well, we're standing on the word, and so we will not ordain people who are self-avowed practicing homosexuals. We won't do marriages for homosexual couples. And then you have the progressive folks in the church who are saying, it's the law of the land, passed by a conservative court, by the way. But anyway, it's the law of the land. And these are human beings, and God is the judge, not us. And so you have the irresistible force and immovable object. In the Black church, I think we're more right now saying, don't ask, don't tell. And sometimes it's obvious, but still don't ask, don't tell, because they bring their giftedness to the church, to the congregation in different ways. So we're just not going to talk about it, which is also unhealthy. I don't know what the answer to that question is. I can tell you, we had a dinner at my house the other night with my lay servant team. And my mom was sitting there, my mother, who's 95. She was listening to us talk at a certain point. She just asked, well, what does the Bible have to say about it? Does the Bible speak to that? And I said, yeah, it does. And she said, well, what does it say? And I reiterated what the Bible says about it.
What does the Bible say?
Well, the Bible speaks about a man will leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, female, and the two will come together and become one flesh. In other places, the Bible speaks against the practice of homosexuality. But then some people, again, want to laser focus on that. It also speaks against fornication. It speaks against adultery. And people will, look the other way when Deacon so-and-so is, hanging out with half the soprano section because, well, at least there's women. So we choose our own canon. And so we'll say, well, I'm going to stand on this in the Bible. Like the people that have made their peace with locking children in cages at the border and separating them from their mothers. When the Bible specifically talks about supporting the orphan and the widow, it talks about welcoming the foreigner and the alien, but you don't look at that part of the Bible because it does not suit whatever your political view or your cultural milieu in North America, in the United States, in the first part of the 21st century. Well, so people they're not being consistent.
What do you say with the argument that there are sinners throughout the Bible? So the fact that someone may have paid off prostitutes and porn stars and and so there
is a prostitute in Jesus' family tree. If you look in, I don't remember whether it's in the Matthew version or the Luke version, where they list his genealogy, and the name Rahab is in there. And if you remember that Rahab was a prostitute who, when Joshua sent spies into Jericho to spy out the town, and they went to her place because it's not unusual for men to go into a prostitute's house. And she said, I know who you are. I've heard about your God. I know why you're here. I just want to know if I help you, if you'll protect me and my family, which was interesting. Well, that's another sermon for another day. But this woman, who I'm sure her people had dismissed her, she's still thinking about them and their safety. But anyway, so Rahab is in the family tree of Jesus. Judah, who laid up with his own daughter-in-law, did not realize who she was at the time, and then she turns up pregnant. So, the Bible is a story about covenant making and covenant keeping by God, covenant making and covenant breaking by human beings. Sin is all up in there. Forgiveness and love and transformation is also in there. And so I don't have time can't take my time pointing my finger at you when I need to get my own life right.
Exactly. And there will never be love in snatching children.
Oh, God. That's an abomination. I don't know how anyone, other than, we don't want the country to, the browning of the country. Well, the country would have been more brown in the first place if you hadn't committed genocide against the indigenous people who were already here. But it's a brown world. The people of the global majority, 9 out of every 10 people on the planet, on the globe, are people of color. And so white people need to just understand everything ain't about you. This is not against you, but how could everything be about you when you're 1 out of every 10 and 9 out of every 10 people on the planet are brown or beige or yellow? Come on now.
And well, let's also talk about the criminal justice system.
Right.
As it results to African American males. And I don't know what the statistics are now, but I know at one point in time it was 1 out of 4 African American males. 1 out of 3 that are in the care of the criminal justice system. Yes.
Kind of way.
Yes. Now, of course, they've enacted some laws, with the sentencing for the drug crimes, where we're seeing that the error of their ways have been realized. But we still have a long way to go with that. And there's so many issues attached to that, why so many young folks, young African American males, were ending up with the criminal justice system. But as we head into this new millennium, go ahead.
It's a moneymaker. I mean, we have for-profit prisons. Really? Mm-hmm. Why would you ever want prisons to be a profit-making venture? If anything, you want it to break even. You want to invest in rehabilitation so folks can do as well as they can, get out and get their lives back. And then you have lawmakers who write laws so that even when you get out, it's like you have this scarlet C you wear.
Exactly.
And so I
can't
get
vote.
I can't vote. I can't get a student loan. I can't live in public housing. It's like, so what do you want me to do? I can't get a job because if you ask on the job application, have you been incarcerated? As soon as I say yes, many people will throw it in the shredder, okay? So I can't get a job, I can't vote, I can't live in public housing to get back on my feet, to get my own place. What do you want me to do? We want you to come back to jail because it's a for-profit enterprise, and we'll just keep the cycle going of recidivism over and over again. That is evil. And we are going to, I remember Thomas Jefferson thinking about the issue of slavery, but it goes beyond that. When I think that God is just, I tremble for my country. People need to be trembling because all of this evil that we as a country have been heaping upon other folks for years, for decades, for centuries, those chickens are going to come home to roost, and we're not going to like it.
What do you think of, as we talk about where we go as African Americans, a lot of, there's a root to a lot of things. One of them, fatherlessness.
That's correct.
That a lot of these guys who turn to the drug industry to make money, that's the role model they saw day after day after day. Then we have another group, that talented 10th is still alive and kicking and growing. But how do we turn those people who are getting out of jail and they want a second chance? How do we give them that leg up so that they can contribute? Like you said, the reason why the cycle continues is because where do you go? You can't get housing, you can't vote, you can barely get a job, you can't get a student loan. So it's hard, and these kids, they don't realize how hard it is when you get out. It's not, there was a time I remember in the 90s when it was cool to have that prison look.
Right.
It ain't cool when you get out and you can't, everybody just wants a chance, a shot at life, when you can't get that shot.
Right, right. There's a lot there. No, that's fine, that's fine.
I can give you a lot.
The first thing, well, I'll go with the fatherlessness. Some of that, frankly, I'm gonna come at it as a preacher, is that we have allowed some of the moral decisions that we make to get watered down, that we no longer have a standard. And so people do what they want to do. Rare is the time that I will do a wedding and the bride and groom come with the marriage license and there's a different address on the license, that they're already living together. And then marriage has become disposable. It's not until death do us part, but it's until we can no longer get along, we just won't work it out, we'll just tap out. And then if you leave, not only you leaving in the instance of a man, leaving your wife behind, but you're gonna leave your kids behind too? That is an abomination, that the Lord has blessed you with a creative activity, creative ability that some people would give their right arm to be able to do, childless couples would love to be able to do, and you're just going to walk away. I just don't get that. I
did a show a couple of weeks ago on child support, and the fact that a good portion of people, they're receiving the money that is owed, but most people are not receiving the full amount.
Right.
It seems that the majority of people are owed, who are the custodial parent, are owed money from the non-custodial parent. Right. A lot of times, the people don't just divorce their spouse, they divorce the family.
Right. But there's also an issue, frankly, with the family courts, that they almost seem to have laser tunnel vision. It's like, all we care about is the money. And it's like, okay, but there's some issues when I go to pick up my child and I can't. They just make it hard or impossible. They'll throw some. I have a nephew that his son's mother will just make stuff up will allege that he said some things or done some things that he hasn't, in part because, unfortunately, he has a record. He's living beyond that. He's doing very well since he's gotten out, built a business, which I guess you have to do because you can't get a job. But he's built a business, etc., so that he can't even respond in the way that she would allege he's responding because he knows that's going to get me sent back. So the people are playing games with the visitation piece, but they still want the money. So that the courts can't just, and you hear it in court all the time, well, that's not what we're here for. That's not what this court is about. You'll have to go to another courtroom and get a date to deal with such a, no, we're here now. Let's deal with it now. Okay, this is what I owe, I'm going to pay it. But these are my days, weekends, months, whatever, weeks for visitation, and I insist on getting them. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. And then, of course, when you're dealing with public housing, people with criminal records sometimes are not allowed to live in them. So you have a person who would want to stay with his spouse, his girlfriend, his family, but can't. So that the game, again, is rigged, the okie doke, but the game is rigged against these people who want to do the right thing. So it's just, society is not treating children well, not doing things in the best interest of children. We are not a society that is worthy of our children right now, and that is very, very concerning. And unless and until we make a turn, we can't look for things to improve.
And also, when we look at how to improve and the number of black males in college opposed to the number of black females. I don't know what the numbers are now, but I know there's always been more black females.
It's a huge disparity at this point. I think at some HBCUs, the numbers might be at like 7 to 1.
Yes.
I remember in my alma mater, American University in Washington, I remember one class of freshmen came in, a small class, because again, the numbers were dwindling, then they've come back up some since then. There were 60 people in a freshman class, 60 African Americans in a freshman class, 54 were female. Okay?
Wow.
Right. And then that didn't include the athletes, but by the time you add on, a handful of basketball players or soccer players or whatever, that's about it. But when you don't have the opportunity to go, when all they did was teach to the test, so you didn't learn how to think critically and maybe discover some things that you found interesting enough to pursue. When you weren't told, okay, well, maybe college isn't for everybody, but you're really good with your hands. How about mechanics or electrician or plumber? They make a whole lot of money. They can support themselves and their families. They don't have to be standing on the corner, ducking bullets to try to make a living. There are all kinds of things that we can do. And then I want to go back to prison for a second. Of course, Stephanie, that a lot of corporations have some of their products made by inmates. Why won't some member of Congress write some legislation that says, you corporations that are profiting from prison labor, when these folks get out, you have to hire some of them? Because they already know how to do the work. They've been doing the work for you anyway for free or for pennies while they were in prison. Now that they're no longer incarcerated, they still know how to do the work. And then that means they come out of prison with a job.
Makes sense.
It makes all the sense in the world, but common sense is uncommon.
And there was just a report about Bloomberg, who's running for president as well, who was using prison labor to help with his campaign. And I think it's going to get swept under the rug because who cares about prisoners?
Who cares about prisoners, right.
So it's what was a one-day story, but that is, again, an example, but that's been happening since after slavery.
Right.
That they would take men off the street. If you were crossing the street and they said, oh, we're gonna accuse you of loitering so we can put you back in the prison system so that you can pick these crops because we can't enslave blacks anymore.
Right.
So we got to have somebody to do the work. So here we are, over 100 years later, 150 years later, and still.
The birth defect still roils us, still hampers us on a daily basis. And we have to learn how to see the common humanity in every person on this planet, whether they look like you or not, whether they speak the same language, worship the same way. It should not matter. We should just treat each other as human beings. And in some instances, if you need to decide, okay, well, we can't really live together or interact with each other like that, then make the decision not to, but don't enact acts of violence against them. For instance, the killer in New York City. Well, I don't know if he killed them. I know he stabbed some people.
Yes, he did.
No one died?
No.
Thank God. Okay, but still, people at the rabbi's house, minding their business, celebrating Hanukkah, and this bozo comes in and starts stabbing people. Why? Because I don't like Jewish people. Well, what have Jews done to you? Well, systemically, blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. What have Jews done to you? What has the Jew done? Probably nothing.
Well,
so
what
why
do
are you bothering them?
feel-
Leave them alone.
Do you feel safe in your church? Right now, do you feel safe in your church? And what can you do to make your congregation feel safer? What are you doing?
Well, number one, I guess I try not to think about it too much. But number two, when we do think about it, we have, taken some precautions. We have, some people who are law enforcement who worship with us. So, we've taken some precautions. But the fact that you have to be concerned about getting shot in church, in a synagogue, in a mosque, is insane. Especially by people who, again, they're in church, in temple, at the mosque, worshiping their God, fellowshipping with each other, minding their business. If you don't like them, stay away from them. Go somewhere else. Why do you have to go? What gives you the right to think that you can take somebody else's life just because they look differently from you, speak different than you, worship differently from you? That is, in 1959, the President's Council on Children stated that racism was a form of mental illness. The number one expression of mental illness in children in the United States in 1959 was racism. It's 2019, 60 years later. Racism is still, and it is a growing mental illness.
And that was my next question, is going to have to be the final question.
Right.
Why have we seen so much of this recently?
A lot of people would like to blame Donald Trump. I think he's given expression to it, but he's not created what wasn't there. So there was, sort of an underlying sentiment among people all along, and perhaps they feel more comfortable expressing it now. On the flip side, people have exposed themselves. They know who they are. We know who they are and where they are. And now the challenge is to connect with right-thinking people. And just by the fact that we are going to be in the majority, in the large majority, put them in a position where they can't have a negative impact on the majority as they are having now.
We're going to have to end it there. It's been a pleasure. We've been talking to Pastor Stephen Tillett, author of the book, Stop Falling for the Okie Doke. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. You've been watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. Have a great day.